Daar in my reis sal ek ooit weer kan sê, my skaat het ek weer gehad.
Good morning, Carbineers. Jerry Carter reporting from Fort Edward. We've had a lot of rain overnight. We've been in drought here. Even some of our native plants in the garden have been drying, but it rained all day and all night last night. We get these massive big things we call bogan moths hammer against my window trying to get to the light. They terrify me. Having a beverage in my Petersburg mug. So, last week we talked about the execution of those 8 Boer prisoners, half of whom turned out to be Dutch school teachers. That's going to create attention. They've been noticed by Emily Hobhouse. That's not someone you want to be noticed by. She's like a terrier. Once she gets a mission on to end suffering and wrongs, Emily's going to take it all the way to the top, to the British Parliament. So Morant and crew are in trouble when they've been noticed by Emily. We heard mention of the Reverend Heese, and he's going to be the topic of this episode. Now, I have to say that last episode, for some reason, YouTube picked up on my using segments of the film to illustrate my story, and I got a copyright warning, not a strike, but the video would have been blocked in certain countries. So I'm going to have to find another way to use images from the film to illustrate the story today, but that's okay, we can get around that. And this is a episode where I can actually show you some live footage again of where Charles took me that day. He took me towards Bundelierkop, which you'll hear about, and you'll see the road or the track that the Reverend was travelling on when he was presumably murdered by Peter Hancock. He seems to have confessed but then withdrawn or redacted his confession, but it's generally accepted or thought that Peter Hancock murdered the missionary because the missionary had seen too much and heard too much, perhaps. So it's quite a long story. I don't want to drag on too much here. Once again, we better get those horses saddled up, check their shoes. We're running low on horseshoes, and the horses are being worked hard, as are the men. Try and finish off this Boer War. Finish off the resistance and the Spelonken. All right, get your khakis on, your British khakis. Get on your leggings, your putties, your boots, your riding boots. Maybe a revolver, a sidearm as well, and take your 303s and let's ride off to the Spelonken and investigate the death of Reverend Daniel Heese. So, why do you think Hancock shot the missionary Visser? Was that his name? Visser? The German missionary?
No, his name was Heese.
Heese?
Heese, yes.
Why do you think Hancock shot him?
He shot him because he was a witness to the execution of those 8 Boers and their 3 black attendants. Because the Reverend Heese came up to Elam because of his friend Warmeyer, who was a school teacher and who owned a shop in what was then Potgieter's Rust, and he'd had a botched thyroid operation at some other hospital or whatever it was in Pretoria. So Heese said he knows of this mission hospital here in the far north that will probably be able to attend to his problem. So they boarded the train at what was then Potgieter's Rust, Mokopane today, and they got to Petersburg, what is today Polokwane, and there they got one of these little 2-wheeled, what we call a spider, little cart. Not a spider, something like that. Anyway, and he brought him up here to Elam Hospital. They obviously overnighted along the way somewhere, and he left this. His name was Craig. We never know if his surname or his first name was Craig, but we just know him as Mr. Craig. And he left him there, and Heese then came into town at that circle. Just down the road from the circle on the right-hand side is the Berlin Mission Society. And here's the state there. Then, after 2 days, he got a message to say that this guy had died. So he went back to Elim, attended to the funeral proceedings. That's one of our shop vehicles. And attended to the funeral. And when he left, when he was at the hospital, there was a wagon with 8 Boers sitting on it, and Morant was there. And he went to talk to one of them, because on that wagon was a guy called Varmeyer from Potgietersrus. That's where the Varmeyer comes in. Varmeyer, who was Heese's good friend. And he went to talk to him, and Morant said to him, "You get away from those prisoners, otherwise you'll join them on the wagon."
That's right.
And then so then the wagon went away, and then the Reverend Heese went to the mission house. I'll show you the mission house. It's a big double-story place of the Swiss Mission Society, where he had spent 1 or 2 nights to go and get his belongings and to say goodbye and thank you. And he was then a little bit delayed. So when he then proceeded to a point where, unfortunately, I can't take you to where that grave is, because it's on a farm that's now got a great big security fence around it. We can't get in there.
Right.
But when Heese arrived at the site, and there were these bodies lying, including Varmeyer, his friend, and also the black attendants, he saw this. And the guys who were in charge there, and I'm not sure whether Morant was there that day, but anyway, they said to Heese that before he leaves this area, he's got to go to Captain Taylor's office, the BAID office, to get to renew his travelling permit, which he did, and that delayed him even more. So when he went off, Hancock said to Morant was there, because he said to Morant and Captain Taylor, "That guy's going to be a problem to us."
This is the letter from Johanna, right? The Reverend's widow. She wrote this to the Berlin Mission Society. So we heard some of it last time in the last episode, but I didn't read the last bit, which was concerning what happened to the Reverend. So here we go. So the prisoners were taken away after Daniel had spoken to them, and she says that Daniel passed by shortly after, and he must have seen the result of the crime. What was said or done in the camp we shall never know, but the culprits would be sure that Daniel would not keep the affair a secret. Nevertheless, they allowed him to proceed on his way, only ordering him to attach a white flag to his wagon, which he did. When she says the culprits, she means the Bushveldt Carbineers. So he asked Van Rooyen, whom he met, if the road was safe, as they tried to frighten him, and being told that nothing had been seen or heard of marauding peasants, he went boldly forward, but not too far. Soon after he had left the camp, one of the 2 lieutenants was commissioned to reconnoitre the road with a patrol party. After they'd ridden for a while, the lieutenant ordered his men to disperse in the bush, and he himself galloped ahead. After he had accomplished the terrible deed, he hurried back to his men, who wondered where he could have been to put his horse into such a state. He, of course, offered no explanation, but the men soon knew what he had done. These 2 deny having committed the deed, though they confess to the murder of the Boers. All the officers are convinced of their guilt, but for want of eyewitnesses, they cannot prove it. That's the end of the letter. Of course, she's referring to Hancock. When she talks about the 2 lieutenants, she's talking about Hancock and Morant. So we don't know where Johanna Heese, the widow, got that information. So with a white flag attached to his spider, that's a little cart, the Reverend C.A.D. Heese, Daniel, and his young unnamed underbelly driver, we never did find out his name, they set off from Fort Edward in the early afternoon of the 23rd of August 1901. Now, he'd been warned by Lieutenant Morant and maybe others that there was Boer activity between Fort Edward and the area known as Bundelierkop, where he was headed. It's even been suggested that he stay over another day or 2 before heading back to Potgietersrus. But Heese had seen the result of the massacre of the 8 prisoners, including his friends, the Dutch teachers. They probably wanted to be gone, get out of there. So the only reason he had gone to the fort was because he'd promised to go and show his pass to the Carbineers, to Lieutenant Morant. So he's heading home, and he'd reached Vars Rivier via Bandelier Cop before nightfall. Now in Davies' Breaker Morant and the Bushveldt Carbineers, that must be a book, a deposition by Trooper Funden Vesterhazen, we've heard from him before, witnessed by Captain Bonham on the 14th of October 1901, that would be for the court-martial, concerns events at the fort after the shooting of the 8 Boers. He reckons that Heese had spoken to Morant. Heese and his driver continued on the road towards Bandelier Cop. Morant galloped back to the fort, called Hancock and spoke to him. Hancock was told to upsaddle your horse. Morant allegedly ended the conversation with the words, "Do your best, Mr. Hancock," to which Hancock replied, "All right, I know what to do." Now, there was only one main transport road from the fort to Bandelier Cop. It traversed mixed bushveld along the edge of the most northwesterly section of the Spelonken in escarpment or watershed, which curved gradually southwards in a rough semicircle. This is clearly indicated on the 1903 map of the Zoutspunberg. I'll show you that map in a moment. But yeah, in the film, it's open land, rolling valleys and hills, but when Charles took me there, it's real scrubby and red earth and ant hills, and yeah. Anyway, the road undulated for most of the way, affording excellent all-round views, including that to the southeast, which on a clear day could have included the distant range near the Mojadjis, on which Sergeant Frank Eland and Captain Hunt were already buried. The people of Mela, a minor black chieftain, had a small settlement on the eastern side of those hills. And it was from this settlement that the young 17-year-old Silas Sono was on his way back to Kreisberg. He's going to be a witness. The following day, on his arrival at the Kreisberg mission station near Fort Clipdown, Silas related to the Reverend Enderman all that he observed the previous day when Reverend Heese had passed him on the road near Mailer's Cop. Enderman immediately sent a transcript of this report to Superintendent Kraus in Petersburg. The version below was adopted by the Berlin Missionary Society and is used because it's the only detailed description of the events, in part that unfolded on the road that afternoon. The English translation has been used and contains some direct translations from the Sotho language of Silas Sono. So this is what the young African boy saw on that day. Quote, Mr. Heese sat in the cart and read a book, most probably the New Testament. A little while later, it crossed my mind I should have asked him whether Mr. would permit me to sit on his cart in order to get home faster. I then ran after the cart as fast as I could, but Mr. Heese was already far ahead. A rider came galloping after me, going in the same direction. He wore khaki clothes like the soldiers do, and he had a light-coloured hat with a cloth of many colours, red, blue, white and black, and wore the badge of a corporal. He was a young, sturdy man with a clean-shaven face except for his moustache. He had 2 bandoliers crossed over his shoulders, and his breast pockets were also full of bullets. His horse was a red-brown colour and had a long tail, and it was not particularly fat. I greeted him, and he answered, with closed lips from the spoor. I saw that his horse was shod. A little while later I came to a place from where one has a free view over the next rise. Here I saw how the rider got off his horse and led his horse by the rein into the bushes. At the same time I noticed a cart wagon coming down from the rise in front of me, a bit further down in the dip. Mr. Heese's cart stood out spanned. When the wagon reached Mr. Heese, the owner of the wagon, Van Rooyen, climbed down and had a short conversation with Mr. Heese. Then they said goodbye, and he followed the wagon which had gone ahead. Van Rooyen was still walking when I met with him. He spoke to me and asked about where from and where to, and whether the road to Mailer's Cop was safe. I told him that I'd seen nothing suspicious and there was nothing to be afraid of. Through this conversation I lost some time. Mr. Heese had in the meantime inspanned and was riding up the rise. I rushed after him and was about 300 yards away from him. The distance was later accurately measured, but I couldn't see his cart because of the bend in the road. That's when a shot was fired. Immediately after that, a second, a third, and a fourth. I asked myself, what does this mean? But I did not think anything bad. In the time from the first to the fourth shot, I'd only moved ahead about 16 yards because I'd slowed down my pace. As everything was quiet after this, I went on, always on the lookout for something to find. Then I saw Mr. Heese's cart standing to the right of the road, but it was turned around with the disselboom, the shaft, pointing to the Spelonken from where he'd just come. I did not see the mules in front of the wagon, but the grass was somewhat high there, 3 or 5 feet high. Yet I should have been able to see the animals. They were nowhere to be seen. Behind the cart stood a horse, bridled and saddled, its reins thrown over it. It was the same horse which I'd seen just before, the red-brown horse of the rider who had overtaken me as he galloped past me just this side of Mailer's Kop. The cart was standing only 50 yards away from me in the road, yet I could not see anybody in it or near it. In me, the notion or the idea arose that the 4 shots, the empty cart and the saddled horse, all formed an unholy alliance, and fear crept into my soul. While I slowly moved forward, scanning the areas to the side of me with little regard for the road ahead, I noticed the lifeless body of the black man on the left side of the road, close in front of me. I was so frightened that I called out aloud, "What is this? A person has been murdered here. Who has murdered him?" And I recognised this dead person. It was Mr. Heese's wagon driver. Shot in the forehead had torn away the top part of his skull, causing a long, wide wound from which the blood and brains were gushing. I put my hand on the body and felt that he was still very warm. Such horror came over me that I could think of nothing else than to run home and report the matter to Mr. Enderman in Kreuzberg.
Now, I've been taken to a place a few times on a guy's farm. We can't get there anymore now. The late Pug Henning. We're going to the Henning's farm, but not onto the one that they've recently sold, that one. And Pug, we called him Pug. Arthur Henning, who was about my age, he's died some years ago. And we'd go along on this sort of a boundary line, and he'd say, "You see these rocks here? My father, whenever we came along here to go to the Waterpoort railway station to deliver something or collect something, my dad would say, this is where they shot the missionary." So the missionary was obviously shot from the front, and probably Hancock, he overtook them on the horse, went past, and then obviously hit his horse off the road, and he himself took aim over the rocks.
Patrols were sent out in response to inquiries from the Berlin Missionary Society, as well as local reports that a missionary had been shot near Bandelierkop. And this is taken from Lieutenant George Whitten from his book, The Scapegoats of the Empire. This is what he says. Nearly a week later, I, with Lieutenant Morant, was at Captain Taylor's office when a neighbour came in and said there was a rumour that a missionary had been killed on the road to Bandelierkop, about 15 miles from Fort Edward, the most dangerous spot on the road to Petersburg. I at once volunteered to take out a patrol and investigate. I was not permitted to go as far as Bandelierkop, but was sent with 6 men to a farmhouse 5 miles out to get what information I could, and was given orders by Lieutenant Morant not to go further. Upon arrival at the farm, I could glean nothing. Anyway, I had all the natives brought in and questioned, but they did not know anything. I then went along the road to several kraals, but could get no news. I met a native postboy with the mail from Petersburg and questioned him, but he knew nothing, and he'd seen nothing along the road. Lieutenant Whitten continued describing the follow-up action that took place about 8 or 9 days after the actual murder date. We continue Lieutenant Whitten's story. 2 days later, however, Lieutenant Hancock was sent out to Bandelierkop with a strong patrol to make a further search and discovered the body of the missionary, his buggy and his mules some distance off the road. There's no reference to the body of the Inderbally driver. There was every indication he had met his death by foul play. That's the Reverend. He had been shot in the breast, probably while sitting in the buggy. The mules, taking fright, had galloped off the road, throwing the missionary out as they travelled along. The buggy was found jammed between some trees and a telegraph post with the pole broken. The mules had freed themselves and were feeding about, harnessed together. Lieutenant Hancock made arrangements for the burial of the missionary and returned to the fort, taking the mules with him. So Lieutenant Morant, or whichever officer made the decision to send Lieutenant Hancock to investigate the incident, acted with little integrity or investigative skill by dispatching the very man on whom rested the suspicion of actually committing the crime. By doing so, Morant had just placed Hancock in the perfect position to cover his tracks had he needed to. So this is Lieutenant Hancock's official report addressed to Captain Taylor, officer in command, Spelonkin, Sweetwater, dated the 27th of September 1901. It states, Sir, I beg to report as follows regarding the Reverend Heese. The morning of the 29th of the 8th, under orders, I proceeded to investigate the presence of a Cape cart reported at Bandelier Kopi and its surroundings, it being reported or rumoured that a man was shot in the vicinity. I proceeded with my patrol in open order, and when at Bandelier Kopi, one of the troopers reported a spider being crushed into the trees with a pole broken. On examining same, I found as follows: 2 pipes, 1 table napkin marked H with red thread, 1 white cuff and a stud, 1 collar size 15.5, 1 spider wrench, half bottle of salad oil, a few biscuits in a small sack. In the back compartment of spider between seats was a considerable amount of clotted blood. I found traces of horses being tied to trees about the spider. My suspicions being roused to the fact some foul play had taken place, I spent some time with my men searching the surroundings. After following the wheel tracks on the road bearing evidence of a rambling attitude, we found the body of a man laying in a cramped position in a state of decomposition, rendering it difficult to judge his height or complexion. He had a wound in the left breast and was wounded on the left hand. His whiskers of about medium length, brownish colour, slightly turning grey, and as near as I could judge, a man of medium build. Articles found on the body were as follows: ordinary cotton shirt, drab-coloured waistcoat, black trousers, white shirt front, small white tie, khaki socks, brown shoes and a truss. There were 3 rugs thrown on the body, 2 striped bright-coloured, one a sort of tweed with ravelled edges. 2 parcels were found by the body, one signed by Captain Taylor, permitting the Reverend Heese to return to Petersburg, and one signed by Captain Bolton of the 2nd Wilts, passing Reverend Heese to town and back. Captain Bolton's signature was written in blue pencil. Pockets of the clothes were turned out. The only article of jewellery found was the stud in cuff above mentioned, where I herewith enclose. The body was about 300 yards from the spider and about 3/4 of a mile from the main Bandelier Kopi on the Spelonkin side. The mules and part of the pole and the harness I found later about 3 miles from the spider. I examined the natives of the nearest kraals. They would not admit having any knowledge of the occurrence. It's quite possible to have happened unknown to the natives. They were over 2 miles from the scene. The mules were tangled up in the harness in a cruel manner. 4 or 5 horse tracks were traced about the scene. Sir, if this is not sufficient, Major Lenihan of the Bushveldt Carbineers has a sworn statement from me and some of the men on patrol with me. I buried the body where it laid by the telegraph line before returning to camp. I have, etc., P.J. Hancock, Lieutenant BVC, OC Fort Edward. True copies signed F.C. Beatson, Major. So Hancock makes no mention of finding a shotgun, Bible and fob watch in the cart and handing them into the military, but these were the items that were returned to the Heese family after the war by the British military. You can see those in the picture. Hancock's report was then copied and sent on to Colonel Hall, who noted the contents and wrote the note below before forwarding it to Reverend Krause. Dear Mr. Krause, I received the original of this last night. Good luck. Reports of November 1901 of the mission head office in Berlin. describes how missionaries Sontag and Enderman were issued with passes and sent to the Bandelier Kop area to investigate the murder. The investigation lasted from the 8th to the 11th of September. They found the grave and marked it with stones and a wooden cross, so that later, when the roads were once again open to free travel, they'd be able to find the body again for reburial at the Mark-Panspoort mission station. In the same way, they also found the body of the black servant. He had not yet been buried, so they buried him at the same place they found him. He was a heathen, an Indabelly from Chief Hans Mapella's location in Malakong. Otherwise, they could find nothing new which could clarify the murder and the reason for this terrible deed. All right, so what we've got is a letter from Daniel Heese's father, Daniel Heese Sr., the murdered missionary. And it's written to a Major Cooper, dated on the 20th of September 1901. It says, "Dear Sir, from communications by Petersburg, Transvaal, we are informed that my son, the Reverend Daniel Heese, Panspoort, Potgietersrust, has been found dead and buried by a British patrol at Bandelier's Kop between Petersburg and the mission station Elam. My son accompanied M. Craig from PP Rust to the hospital of Elam, and on his return home he and his boy were shot dead." He means the Indabelly. "The patrol found him after 5 days. The boy was shot through his head and my son through his left hand and left breast. If this be true, then it indicates that his murderers were flat before them and that my son had time to put his hand on his breast. I beg now that you will be good enough to communicate with the military authority at Petersburg to inform us whether this be true and whether his body is identified by the Reverend Kraus at Petersburg, and whether his body could not be conveyed to Panspoort to be buried there. As my son has lost his life in doing good to a British subject, I hope you will be good enough to give me your assistance in this sad case. I have the honour to be, Sir, your obedient servant D. Heese. I am prepared to pay the expenses of the conveyance of the body." So we've got a handwritten, I'll put up on the screen, you can see the handwritten edition of that letter. And this is an official report of the incident from the registers of the Berlin Missionary Society. And it says, on the 30th October, the burial of the murdered missionary Heese Jr. took place at the Swiss mission station Elam. 2 days previously, his body had been exhumed at the scene of his murder by English soldiers in the presence of missionary Gottschling and placed in a coffin lined with tin and taken to Elam. Apart from the Swiss brothers, there were several of our missionaries present. On the 30th of October at 10 a.m, ceremonial burial took place. The Swiss missionary de Muron conducted the service. Missionary Gottschling told the life story of the deceased. The missionaries, accompanied by their Swiss brothers and sisters, sang funeral songs. An abundance of wreaths came from far and wide. The officers of the English troops in the vicinity also attended the service. Well, that's interesting because in the missionary station, or the Berlin Mission Society, is stating that he was murdered by British soldiers, but they're also saying that the English troops attended the service. So 3 years later, on the 23rd of August 1904, on the 3rd anniversary of his death, the remains of Heese were exhumed at Elam and reinterred at his mission station at Makapanspoort, which is in Potgietersrust. It's hard to say that. Makapanspoort. The entry in the Berlin Mission Register continues. Mrs. Heese, that's Johanna, a German subject, has been given £5,000 and a pension. I learn she is now living in the Orange River colony. And Superintendent Kraus ended his report with these words: "In him we lose a very able and tireless missionary. an ever helpful and brotherly minded brother who, through faith and prayer, was busy preparing his family and his congregation for the day of the revelation. So it's interesting to note that Peter Hancock was acquitted of the murder of the Reverend Heese in the court-martial, and his alibi was that he was visiting these Boer women. Now, we heard about Mrs. Shield a couple of episodes back. The Boers had her in their sights because one of her sons was working with the British. Her husband was known to wear this German military uniform. He worked with the Boers, and he was of German extract, so he had this special German officer's uniform, and he fought at the Battle of Elandslaagte, which the Boers took a loss at. So he was sent to St. Helena, prisoner of war he was. So Mrs. Shield was having, we suppose, an affair with Peter Hancock. And in the film, you see Peter Hancock, when he's being questioned about where he was on that day, he confesses up to the British judges or the officers who were presiding over the court-martial that he was visiting these Boer women for nefarious reasons. And he says something, it's Brian Brown, he says something like, no harm taking a few slices from a cut loaf. Australian humour. So it's interesting, that these two women actually provided him with an alibi on that day. It's thought that because the distance between Elam, Fort Edward, and these women's houses or farms and Bandolierkop wasn't that far, that he could have done two women and a murder on the same afternoon. And it is remembered that when he was seen, that his horse was really had been worked hard, was in quite a lather. So I did ask Charles about the story of the affair with Mrs. Shield and Peter Hancock, the Australian. So Hancock's alibi at the time was he was having sex with a Boer woman. Is that?
Yes, he was having was having it on with Mrs. Shield, with Magdalena Shield,
right?
Whose house I could take you to, but there's nothing left other than the foundations.
Sure.
And it's on a bad road. So he never came back here. But while he was away, Hancock was visiting Mrs. Shield, and he used that. She actually testified in his favour.
Yes.
At the court-martial that he was visiting her that day.
Yeah.
So there was a lovely follow-up that I had one day, some years back. Inga phoned me. She always phones me if there's something sort of exciting in the pipeline. She phoned me. She said, "You're going to have fun tomorrow." I said, "Oh, is that so?" Yeah, I knew about this too. She said, "You've been going." Shield. There's a Shield family. There's a Shield family here, and she has asked if she can travel with you because she wants to record what you're going to tell them. So I said, "That's fine." So off we went, and they asked me a couple of questions, and I was able to tell them about their two sons. One of them had joined the Brits. Adolf Jr., I think his name was. He joined the Brits, and he was actually present the night that Frank Elan and Hunt were shot dead.
Right.
He was there that night commanding the Mujaji warriors. I think that was Adolf Jr. Then there was another son who was shot by the Boers at, I think, Malopo, somewhere on the Malopo River. There was a skirmish there. So I told them all this, and I also told them about this is the place where Magdalena Shield was, and she was entertaining Hancock. So there was quite a group that day, and when we drove back, I said, so whatever his name was, I forget his name, this guy. I said, so what are you going to do? I've told you as much as I can about what happened here. And he was quiet for a moment, and he scratched his ear or his nose or something. He says, I think I do a DNA test to see if I've got any Australian blood in me. I'll never forget that. That was classic.
That's brilliant.
But that was just where the mist sort of starts on the mountain.
Yeah.
There's a road that goes over there, and the Shield's home, Rosbach, is up on that road. But as I say, if there was something to show you, I'd gladly show you. All there is now is a ruin. They've stolen the bricks and the corrugated iron, and everything is gone. So we won't be going there. but it's just over where that mist is on the mountain, over those the distance.
And Hancock would have ridden from Elam over there.
From Fort Edward.
Yeah.
And in fact, when we get to Fort Edward, there's a monument there which actually shows a little bridle road.
Yeah.
Where well, I say road, probably a pathway for a horse, which was very much a shortcut, because Fort Edward, that we are going to on the way home, Fort Edward, I'll point out now where the blue gum trees are. You might see it now. I don't think so. I think I'm too late. I should have pointed it out to you. It's up on a hill.
All right.
You can see those Seligna plantations. No, it's out of sight now, but it's about in that direction that I'm painting. Fort Edward, I'm talking now of the Bushveldt Carbineers, their base.
Yeah.
Fort Edward's probably about 5 or 6 k's from Elam Hospital.
Okay.
We call this area Elam.
Yeah.
One of the reasons was that this is where this mission hospital was, and it's still there. It's not a mission hospital anymore. It now belongs to government.
So just a couple of things before we wrap up and have a look at the approximate site where the missionary was murdered. In the movie they make a point of it, and it's generally sort of believed, or has been believed, that because Heese was a German, that it caused an international outcry, that once this was noticed by Germany and they raised objections or protests, that it hurried the end of the war, and that the Australians became scapegoats to be executed to quieten down the Germans. But according to Charles's book, that's not quite right. So it's also mentioned that George Whitten, in his book, The Germans Demanded Redress when they received reports from an African that a German subject had been shot by British troops. According to one of the authors on Breaker Morant, he says that the German government demanded of the British government that guilty parties should be punished, and the British government at the time had not a friend on the continent of Europe. Therefore, scapegoats had to be found. However, according to Charles, Heese, the Reverend, he was born in the British Cape Colony, so technically speaking, he was British. He wasn't a German citizen, despite the fact that he worked for the Berlin Missionary Society. So there was a question asked to the British House of Commons regarding any possible communication from Germany addressed to the Foreign Office or to Lord Kitchener in the matter of the murder of the Reverend Heese. This was under the Parliament Secretary for Foreign Affairs, Viscount Cranbourne, replied on the 8th of April 1902 that, quote, "No such communication has been made to the Foreign Office, and I understand that my right honourable friend, the Secretary of State for War, has no information as to any communication on the subject having been made to Lord Kitchener on behalf of the German government." So the claim that Britain was worried about German involvement in the final stages of the Boer War doesn't seem to hold water. There's no reference of any personal or direct communication between Kaiser Wilhelm of Germany and his nephew Edward VII of Britain. Nothing's ever been found, despite widespread legend that this was definitely the case. Could it be the reason why such rapid and drastic action was taken against the officers at Fort Edward? If so, then Heese's death could have been the catalyst that terminated the existence of the Bushveldt Carbineers, because, they were wound up not long after this. Several eminent South African historians, enthusiasts and commentators share the opinion that, had it not been for the murder of the Reverend Heese, none of the other Bushveldt Carbineers murders would have gone to trial. Oh, yeah.
Yapping dogs around.
That's what you need.
Then probably 4 or 5 who lived with the goats in their corral at night, and then we spent the day with the goats.
I'm surprised there's still litter. Like there's a bottle there. I thought we're in the middle of nowhere.
No, there's litter everywhere. We are a terrible nation for litter.
Yeah.
I don't know if you noticed, as we were leaving Port Edward, there were all those bales on the side of the road.
Yeah, what's in that?
That's recycling. That's one guy who's seen the light.
Black plastic bags.
All sorts of things, yes, and tins and whatnot. Don't stick them in.
This clip of when we were on top of the kopje looking out was really windy, so I've redone the audio for you. But I'm not sure if that kopje in the far distance is Bandelier kopje, but Charles is pointing out that track that goes along the road, and the Reverend and his cart were to the right of that track, and you'll see me point it sort of into a little valley to the right of that track. That track was where some British were ambushed by Beyers Commando in one of the only actions the Bushveldt Carbineers had with the Boer commandos. But anyway, this is the area where the Reverend Heese was killed.
You don't know how many times to life at the Onderstepoort Veterinary Centre.
Oh, yeah.
A wonderful person. It was her grandfather, this was her grandfather, and his unnamed Ndebele driver, who I believe his name was Silas. We've managed to find it at a... And this is the family that was paid compensation, not by the British government, but by the British Army.
Oh.
They were paid compensation. And as I say, to me that's an indication of admitting.
Well, you say presumably by the Bushveldt government, so
this was before
he was never found guilty, Hancock?
Well, Hancock had that letter, had that information become known during a court-martial, he would have been found guilty. But you know, he wrote a confession, which somehow somebody, one of the officers said, don't show that to the court-martial guys.
Right.
So for some other reason, that came out in one of the accounts or the letters that I got from. Or I don't think I included it because it was after that I managed to get one or two comments written by members of the court-martial.
Yeah.
Of the sort of judiciary, and it was mentioned there that there had been talk of a confession made by Hancock, which they hadn't seen.
Right.
So Professor Marie Smuts, I think it was her two aunts who were the children of Carl. His name was Carl Heese. And I don't know what his wife's name was. They were sent with that compensation grant that they were given. They were sent to a university in Germany.
Oh wow!
And so at least something positive came out of that, if you can call it positive. Oh, I suppose so. But there must have been probably 20 or more of the Heese descendants here that day.
Wow!
It was very encouraging.
Fantastic. Anyone from the German government here?
No.
Daar waar mijn Sari woont, daaronder in die mil is bij de groendoornboom, daar woont mijn Sari Mare, daaronder in die mil is bij de groendoornboom.